Welcome to a live episode of the Play-by-Play, a sports media talk show brought to you by Awful Announcing, where, unlike Drake May, we do know that Cam Newton is on First Take twice a week. He's Drew Lerner, a senior editor at Awful Announcing. I'm Ben Axelrod, a senior editor at Awful Announcing. And on today's show, we are going to talk about the most irrelevant teams in professional sports. Drew, the jumping off point for this was the return of Bill Simmons' mailbag, where it made me feel very old because it's clear that his current audience is not old enough to remember his original mailbags based on the type of questions he was getting. And two, he made some headlines, probably in thanks to us and probably in thanks to me, by deeming the Columbus Blue Jackets the most irrelevant franchise in professional sports. He was asked the question, who's the most irrelevant franchise in professional sports? And whoever asked it did suggest the Blue Jackets. It seemed to be a Blue Jackets fan who was asking it. The specific criteria here, Drew, is, and this is, I believe the listener's name was Jesse, is they're too bad to make the playoffs, but not so bad that they're top in the news with their total dysfunction. It's a team that's usually in a small market, bonus points if their location name is generic: Indiana, Golden State, New England. It's a team that makes you say, oh yeah, they still exist when they're picking eighth in the draft. Drew, I don't know about you. I've spent a lot of time, like previous to the mailbag, thinking about this. Like sometimes I will, the part about this that stood out to me was that, oh yeah, they're picking eighth in the draft. Like sometimes, especially as a fan of teams who often pick high in the draft, sometimes there are other teams up there that it's like, oh yeah, they do still exist. So what we're going to do today, as I ramble here, is we're going to go through the NHL, MLB, the NFL, and the NBA and give our lists. I don't know your list. You don't know my list. We'll see if we have any crossover here, and we'll try to determine who the most irrelevant teams are in professional sports. So before we get to
I picked one team. I narrowed it down all the way to one. No, for each league. So I have some honorable mentions.
Yeah, I crowned one as well per league. And but yeah, I definitely there are some leagues where definitely a few to consider. So I'm wearing my Blue Jackets gear. Drew, let's start with the NHL. Who is your pick for the most irrelevant team in the NHL?
I think there's just the most options in the NHL. Like, I don't know. You look at like the Winnipeg Jets. They're a team that I didn't even realize was like an actual real sports team, I think, until college. I know they've only been around for, probably less than 20 years at this point, but I left them off my list because they've had some recent success, or at least compared to their normal standards, some recent success. But then you have teams like the Islanders who haven't really done anything in our lifetime. There's teams like I never think about like ever, like the Dallas Stars, until like a couple of years ago when they made a run in the playoffs. I don't know. There's some smaller market teams. But to me, the team that took the cake was the Buffalo Sabres. And listen, I'm not like a hockey guy. I really tune in for maybe some of the Stanley Cup playoffs. So like I do not have the depth of knowledge to really discuss this authoritatively. But with just some brief research, they haven't been to the playoffs since 2010. They last made it to the conference finals in 2006, 2007. And they don't have a Stanley Cup win, 2 appearances. They pretty much just have a long history of irrelevancy. I couldn't name a single Buffalo Sabres player if I tried. I think there's kind of like a few teams that probably fall into a similar category with hockey. I mean, I can't recall ever hearing about the Buffalo Sabres on any sort of ESPN show or like national sports podcast that I listen to. So they were, unfortunately for my Buffalonians out there, they were my pick as the most irrelevant.
Yeah, it's funny because I was trying to come up with somebody who wasn't the Blue Jackets, and I do think deeming any NHL team the most irrelevant in all of sports, as Bill did in his mailbag based on his Jesse's suggestion, like it feels like cheating. It's like the NHL as a whole is pretty irrelevant just in terms of that. I mean that in terms of they don't receive the same mainstream coverage that the other three quote unquote big four leagues receive. I think like outside the whole basis of Bill's argument was, when was the last time you had a conversation about the Columbus Blue Jackets? I haven't had a conversation about any NHL team outside of the Florida Panthers like in the last 2 decades. And granted, not a big hockey guy. So yeah, we are probably not the best people to be making this argument. But as I looked at the list, the Sabres were the one that stood out to me as like, oh, I thought they were some historic franchise back in the day. They've only been around since 1970. They haven't been to the playoffs now in over 15 years. Like they are, the only thing I know about them is Dominic Hasek played for them like in the early 2000s when they had those sweet black and red sweaters. So they do have that going for them. They play in a good sports town in Buffalo. So I think that's a good pick. I'm going to go with the Blue Jackets. I think the Blue Jackets should wear this as a badge of honor. I think the fact that this has become such a big story, and I saw it was on not only the Blue Jackets Reddit, but on the Columbus subreddit, and the general sentiment was like, well, he's not wrong. And these are among, Columbus people and Blue Jackets fans. A Blue Jackets player I know commented on it. I'm a little in the weeds because I do know a lot of Blue Jackets players and their names. And like, I have had conversations about the Blue Jackets, but like as somebody from Columbus, Ohio, it is like kind of wild to me that we do have a major four professional sports franchise. It's weird we have any team outside of Ohio State, frankly. So, look, I support my Blue Jackets. I love my Blue Jackets, but I think they should wear this as a badge of honor. And I think that, if they go on a playoff run, I think they're off to a pretty solid start this season. I think they're 10-8-2, which qualifies as a solid start for the Blue Jackets. I think they should just like rub this in Bill Simmons' face and make it a rallying cry. So I am going to dub the Columbus Blue Jackets the most irrelevant franchise in the NHL. But I think they should. I'm doing it proudly. I'm kind of doing a cop out here.
I will say that I think you're the first person I've ever seen wearing any sort of Blue Jackets merch. So I got to give you credit. Like I've probably actually seen Buffalo Sabres merch out in the wild. Have not seen any Blue Jackets gear. So I think you might have the win on that one.
I will say that this is a throwback. This is like this is Stinger. They haven't used the Stinger logo in probably close to 20 years. They do have pretty sweet jerseys. So if they ever do get good, they should lean into that a little bit more. Let's move to baseball, which I think is baseball is interesting because I think if you were to rank the leagues, MLB is a pretty solid third behind the NBA and NFL, obviously. But there are also less. I think there might be more NBA candidates than MLB candidates. I thought there were going to be a lot of MLB candidates. I'll start this one. My pick is the Colorado Rockies. They came to the league, I believe, in 1994. Not a lot of history, not a lot of traditionally great players, not a lot of team success. They get the bonus points for having a generic name, Colorado. That was a part of Bill's criteria as well. The only Colorado Rocky story I could tell you from the last 20 years is that they just hired Paul DePodesta 2 weeks ago. And I am only keyed in on that because he was the Cleveland Browns chief strategy officer over the course of the last 10 years. So other than that, like, I don't know anything about the Rockies other than that it's easier to hit home runs at Coors Field. So there are a couple of, I want to hear who you picked first, but I do have a couple of other candidates.
All right, so I narrowed it down to 3 teams. It was the Cincinnati Reds, the Kansas City Royals, and then the Colorado Rockies. And I settled on the Rockies as well. Honestly, the thing that was making me hesitant to pick the Rockies was because their recent performances have been so bad to almost make them historically relevant. But I went back through the decades and got some stats since 93 when I think, or 94, whenever their first year was. The thing that stood out to me was just how like consistently mediocre they are. And if you look at their win percentage in each decade, the 1990s, they had a 478 win percentage. In the 2000s, they had a 474 win percentage. And in the 2010s, they had a 464 win percentage. So that equates to like you're getting between 75 and 80 wins a year in an average year, just below 500, maybe more like 70 to 80 wins, which is like not bad enough to be talked about amongst like the worst teams in baseball, but also like not even close to like playoff contention, right? So, and then there's also the whole thing that they're a newer franchise. There's no history, and I also think one of my criteria, and I think this is going to be a theme with the rest of my picks, is they're a West Coast team, but they're not in a major media market. So they're not in like SoCal or San Francisco where there's like media power brokers and relevancy there. Like they're out in Denver. So not many of their games are going to be put on national television for that reason. They have one World Series appearance in their history, 2 playoff appearances since 2010. They've never won the NL West like in their entire history. Every playoff appearance has been a wild card appearance. So, but they also just like don't get talked about. So I think they're like kind of the clear cut to me, most irrelevant baseball team.
Yeah, that's they also feel like a distant third in their own market behind the Broncos and the Nuggets, especially with the Nuggets' recent success. So, the other team that stood out to me was the Minnesota Twins. They get the points for the generic city name for Minnesota, and 2, they're rivals to my Cleveland Guardians. So I feel like I kind of had a bias to not think of them as irrelevant, but really just like not a lot of team success, not a lot of star players outside of Joe Mauer. I think they were in the ALCS in 2002. Prior to that, they hadn't won the World Series or been to the ALCS since 1991. So just not a team that's had like a lot of like mileage in my lifetime. So the Twins were the other one that stood out to me as well, in addition to the 2 others. I also think what was interesting about doing the baseball exercise is 2 years ago, I think we would have said the Pittsburgh Pirates. Like the Pittsburgh Pirates are pretty irrelevant, but it kind of goes to show the difference one player who plays every 5 days can make. Like Paul Skeens is one of the 5 most famous players in all of baseball. Like I think that, factor in Livy Dunn, I think that automatically takes the Pirates off the list. So they 100%. Were like kind of a non-starter. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. No, that I thought the exact same thing. I said, before Skeens, like the Pirates probably would have been my number 1 overall pick in this draft. But that it's just one player can really change things up.
Who you got for the NBA?
All right. The NBA. Wow. Okay. I'm just going to go out and say it. I think it's the Sacramento Kings. And I think it's pretty clear cut. They've been to one conference final since moving to Sacramento. That was all the way back in 2002. They've had one non-play-in playoff appearance in the last 20 years. So they very rarely make it to the postseason. And then the kicker for me is that they're the 4th most popular basketball team in their own state. Like and it's like not even close, really. You have the 2 LA teams and the Warriors, and the Kings are just a complete afterthought. And I'm thinking just in my lifetime, like who are the most relevant Kings players? Like you had like Boogie Cousins, De'Aaron Fox. Like I don't know. They just don't really have the star power. They had the one series a couple years ago where they took the Warriors to 7 games in the first round. And that was like a really fun series. But that is literally my only like recollection of any Kings team ever doing anything like relevant. So I think to me, the Kings were a pretty clear number 1 pick.
Yeah, our age gap definitely shows on this one, because to me, like the most famous Kings are Chris Webber and Mike Bibby and Vlade Divac. But my pick is also the Kings. I agree. I think it's pretty clear cut. I think the other team you could make a case for is the Charlotte Hornets, who really have not done anything. I kind of lost track of like their lineage between themselves and New Orleans, but ever since I think they were first the Bobcats and then became the Hornets. I mean, they've been They've done nothing. They do, though, and this is where my age gap shows. I think like LaMelo Ball is insanely popular among young people, and that's not something that registers with me, but I am aware of his popularity. I think it's the Kings. I think even looking at a further lens than you just did, like the most famous thing about them is that they were on the wrong end of the 2002 West. They were on the wrong end of the Tim Donaghy ref gambling controversy. And that's it. Like that's what they are known for, other than being the argument for against the Kings would be that they do have enough dysfunction that they have remained in the headlines on a fairly consistent basis. But I do think that's kind of settled in recent years. And they like, I follow the NBA pretty closely. I have not been able to keep track of like which Chicago Bulls leftovers they still have. Like that's their whole strategy just seems to be leftover Chicago Bulls. I think they have Zach LaVine. I think they have DeMar DeRozan, but it's like, they are just a team that is there. They are not terrible. They are not going to make any sort of noise. They traded De'Aaron Fox to the Spurs. So I think the Kings, they play in a very obscure market, which I should help them. Like you look at what Oklahoma City's doing, and like I think you become kind of a cool story when you play in an obscure market and are good. But they play in an obscure market and are not good and are very bad. So yeah, I think the Kings are the right pick.
It's pretty interesting. If you go back to that Kings Warriors series a few years ago, it was absurdly highly rated for a first round series. Like a lot of people were watching it, and it's crazy because it's two California teams. Obviously there's the Steph Curry factor, but the Kings have no recent history. But for whatever reason, like people were really into that series. And I do think they could replicate like a Thunder like popularity if they ever got good. I do like kind of concede to your point too. Like growing up, I do remember seeing plenty of like segments about the Kings' dysfunction, like maybe in the 2010s. And kind of right after they got Cousins, they drafted Cousins. I feel like there was a lot of segments about how they're just wasting this generational talent. But yeah, other than that, like I just think they're an afterthought.
Yeah. The other team, I mentioned the Chicago Bulls. I could not make a case for the Chicago Bulls, but I do think if you factored in degree of difficulty, like we're going on like 30 years of irrelevance for the Chicago Bulls post Michael Jordan, and they had no semblance of relevancy before Michael Jordan. Like it's funny. I know people think about the Cleveland Cavaliers and they just think about LeBron James. The Chicago Bulls are just Michael Jordan, and they play in the country's third biggest market. Like it's kind of crazy that franchise has remained as irrelevant as it has, with all the built-in advantages you would think, having a basketball team in Chicago would have. So I do want to throw in the Bulls in terms of degree of difficulty, but I'm with you on the Kings.
Yeah. And I'll add one thing. I was also considering the Hornets as my probably second place team. I kind of gave them the ball factor, and then also kind of the previous owner factor with Michael Jordan that has made them kind of relevant. And then I thought for a hot second about the Pistons, just because for most of my lifetime they've been bad, but they have so much history and they're in such a big market. I just didn't think that worked at all. But until recently, the last 15, 20 years, the Pistons were very much an afterthought in NBA discourse.
Yeah, basketball is a tough one because one player can kind of make all the difference in your history, not only in terms of your current relevancy. Also, the Atlanta Hawks. The Atlanta Hawks are kind of just
that's interesting. I didn't think of them, but yeah.
All right, NFL. This one's tough. This one's definitely tough because I don't think there are any irrelevant NFL teams, but I do think I settled on 3 candidates. And my 3 candidates were the Houston Texans, who have just like no history since coming into the league in 2002, at least of note. They actually have had like a lot of great players randomly, but just no history. Obviously live in the Dallas Cowboys shadow in Texas. I don't know any Houston Texans fans. I don't expect you to know any Houston Texans fans. So I'd put them in there. In conjunction with them, I'd put the Tennessee Titans, who have had, some success. They've played in the Super Bowl in my lifetime. They've, the Mike Vrabel teams were pretty good. They were just in an AFC title game just a few years ago. But, you saw once they lost Mike Vrabel, they're bordering on, dysfunction in terms of that's the only thing keeping them in the headlines. And then the team I'm going with, and there's a reason I didn't invite Brendan Clean on this podcast, is the Arizona Cardinals. I think the Arizona Cardinals are the most irrelevant team in the NFL. I don't know any Arizona Cardinals fans aside from Brendan who lives in the area. I see, I go out to bars, I go out to restaurants. When I was in college, you go to parties, people are wearing jerseys. I've never seen an Arizona Cardinals jersey out in the wild. I don't even know at this point whose jersey you would see. They seem to be that kind of destination franchise for stars of yesteryear, Emmitt Smith, DeAndre Hopkins, JJ Watt. Like, they are very much a place that star players go, it seems like, to retire. Although DeAndre Hopkins is still playing, but you get my point. So I think it's the Arizona Cardinals, and I would argue it's the Arizona Cardinals by a wide margin.
Yeah, I was interested to see if we'd both settle on the Cardinals, and we did, which means that for every league but the NHL, we settled on the same team. Pretty interestingly,
yeah.
I did think this was the hardest one because, just like you said, like, no NFL team is really irrelevant. The Cardinals are still going to get talked about on national platforms. It just depends on the story. But I do think, like, compared to Houston, who's had just more on the field success, and Tennessee, who's also had more on the field success recently, the Cardinals are just kind of similar to how I was talking about the Rockies, where they're not bad enough where, you have to talk about how bad they are, but, they're never really good enough to talk about how good they are. The Cardinals fit right in that mold. The stat that stood out to me was, if you go through the decades of the Arizona Cardinals' history, Utah, man, that's funny. Thank you, Steve. They've never been to the postseason, the Arizona Cardinals. They've never been to the postseason more than twice in a decade throughout their whole history. So they went twice in the 70s, once in the 80s, once in the 90s, twice in the 2000s, twice in the 2010s, and then they've had one playoff appearance so far in the 2020s, which means just like 80 to 90% of the time, if you're a Cardinals fan, you're just out of it. You're not getting a postseason run. You don't even have the hope of a postseason run. You're just like the criteria said, like, you're usually drafting like 8th because you're not like a 2-win team, but you're winning 6 or 7 games each year. Their last like championship claim, I found this interesting. I didn't know this was pre-merger, obviously, in 1947. So other than the NFC championship, of course, in 2008, when they went on to lose to the Steelers in the Super Bowl, they haven't laid claim to any sort of championship since then. And then also they're again, like, on the West Coast, but not in a major media market. I know Brendan will argue that Phoenix is the 5th biggest city in the United States. That's true, I suppose. I didn't actually know that until yesterday on the podcast. But no one in Phoenix is like part of the national media. So
yeah,
they really just don't have any advocates for them. And quite frankly, they just haven't had many interesting storylines to talk about recently.
Yeah, you mentioned that Super Bowl, and I think that's what some people would point to is like, they played in a fairly memorable Super Bowl. Shout out Santonio Holmes, Ohio State Buckeye. That was 17 years ago. And it's like, they did that with a quarterback in Kurt Warner, who everybody remembers as a member of the Rams before they remember him as a member of the Cardinals. They had Carson Palmer, for that stretch, about a decade ago now. And I think people remember Carson Palmer more as a Cincinnati Bengal than they do an Arizona Cardinal. They also have the generic name. So two of my choices did wind up with the generic name. So that was kind of interesting. But yeah, I think factoring degree of difficulty, if we were each going to choose who is the most irrelevant team in professional sports, I'd make a case for the Cardinals. I think also it's like, even benched or didn't bench Kyler Murray. It wasn't even interesting enough of a story. It's like, Kyler Murray's not good enough for us to talk about the way we talk about even Baker Mayfield or any of those B-level quarterbacks, but he's not bad enough that like it becomes, oh my God, the Cardinals it's just kind of a non-story. So I think it's pretty clearly the Cardinals. So
right. The most interesting Kyler Murray story is his Call of Duty habit. Like, I'm not even joking when I say that. Like, I'm pretty sure that's like the most interested I've been in the Arizona Cardinals in recent years.
Yeah. Well, if we get yelled at by a horde of Cardinals fans on social media because of this, I'll change my mind, but I think this is a strong pick. Real quick, before we get out of here, I asked ChatGPT for its list, just based purely on the exact same criteria, the exact same quote that Bill Simmons got from his readers. NHL, it went with Columbus Blue Jackets. The bonus candidates were the Arizona Coyotes, who I'm not totally sure are still a team.
They're not. They are now the Utah Mammoth. Yeah.
So that's an issue with ChatGPT, is it's not fully up to date. So for everybody advocating for AI, there are some drawbacks here. So the Blue Jackets were its top team, but its honorable mentions were the non-existent Arizona Coyotes and the Minnesota Wild, which
that was my number 2 team, the Wild.
Yeah, that's a good
for no particular reason other than, I think I saw like a meme on Twitter the other day about, I guess PTI had a segment on the Minnesota Wild for whatever reason. And someone was like, when was the last time the Minnesota Wild logo appeared on Pardon the Interruption?
If you told me they were the team that became the Winnipeg Jets, I'd believe it. Like Wild are a good shout. Again, the lack of updates for ChatGPT come into play here, because for the NBA, it said that Indiana Pacers, obviously, just went to the NBA Finals, played in the Game 7. I don't think you could, even without that, I don't think you could make a strong case for the Pacers outside of the generic name.
Indiana's too much of a basketball crazed state to claim
exactly.
That. Yeah.
Exactly. They'll always have a diehard fan base. So the bonus candidates, it didn't mention the Kings. It did mention the Charlotte Hornets and your Washington Wizards. Are you a Wizards fan?
I thought about the Wizards. I guess I can claim them on some level because I go to a few games every year, but there hasn't really been much to follow since I've moved to DC. So
yeah. And then MLB, it went with the Rockies, and its bonus candidates were the Royals and the Tigers. I think Tigers have been too good and have too good of a pitcher in Skubal to put them on the list right now. But again, I don't think it's taking that into account. And then NFL, it said Tennessee Titans. Another team I did at least bounty about was the Carolina Panthers. Has them on the list. But they've consistently had star players, a little like the Texans. They always have at least one or two like all pros who keep them at least intriguing.
And then the Dave Tepper of it all, makes it interesting.
Yeah. They definitely have that Cleveland.
That's why I didn't pick the Jaguars either, because they've had like controversy, the Urban Meyer thing. Their owner's kind of like a controversial figure at times. And I mean, I guess they've had some good teams as well. Some more relevant teams than the Cardinals for sure. But I was just trying to think of those, kind of smaller market, no history type of teams. And the Jaguars and Panthers were kind of stood out in that criteria.
I also encounter a lot of Jaguars fans on social media, and I can't really explain why. They just, maybe the Central Florida of it all, I don't know, but I do run into a lot of Jaguars fans on the Twitter streets, and then it does have the Arizona Cardinals on the list as well. So this was a fun exercise. It would be fun to maybe run this back a year from now, maybe in the slower days of the sports calendar, and see where we stand, see how much difference one year can make, how much difference one player can make. So I
think it's interesting that we're aligned pretty much across the board, other than the NHL.
Yeah, and we both view this through kind of the sports media type of lens as well. So maybe we bring in an outsider next time, get their perspective. But that's going to do it for today's episode of the Play-by-Play. If you enjoyed the show, subscribe, tell a friend, leave a review. We will be back with you next week, breaking down all the latest in sports media.